Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Toastmaster. So, yes, at this time last weekend, I was about 7 hours, into would turn into a 26-hour ordeal running through the mountains of Utah. And I signed up for this speech 2 weeks ago. So before the race, I did not know exactly what I was going to be talking about today, whether it was going to be good or bad. But I found out last weekend. And this was my second 100-mile race. And just like the first one, was a pretty powerful experience. And I want to talk about it and tell you a little bit about how the race went and what my key takeaways were. So what I'm going to do is kind of, give you kind of a few thoughts on the lead into the race, about 2 minutes of recapping the run itself, and then finish up with some of my reflections and key takeaways from this particular race. So, first, the lead into the race. 1 year ago, this September, middle of September 2017, I ran my first 100-miler. It was in northern Arizona, and long story short, it went really well. It was my first one. I didn't know what to expect. I went pretty conservative into it, but it went much better than I expected it to. And I finished well. It was a smaller race, with about 90 to 100 runners, but I finished in just under 24 hours in 4th place overall. So coming into this year, I said I want to do that again, and so I signed up for this race, which starts in Logan, Utah, and runs through the mountains, the northern Wasatch, and finishes in Idaho. And I began my training block for it specifically in January, and had several other races throughout the year, which were goals in and of themselves, but really they were intermediate goals to lead me to this culminating event for my 2018 running season. I dealt with some injuries this year. I was limited a little bit in my training with a finicky hip, but it was not, in the end, I was able to push through and still get decent training and still stand on the starting line of this race feeling like I was ready and prepared. So that's what got me here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the race itself and how it progressed, because 100 miles is a long way. A lot happens. It's hard for me to condense it down into 2 or 3 minutes, but I'll do my best. Slide, please. So like I said, the race started in Logan, Utah, 6 a.m. last Friday, still in the dark, and it started with a long climb up into the mountains. And during that initial climb, I got stuck pretty far back in the pack. So for the first 6-10 miles, I was moving pretty slow, slower than I was comfortable moving. But I really wasn't in a position to pass anyone because it was on a narrow trail, and the field was still pretty tightly packed. This picture up here on the left is looking back down the canyon towards the starting line. Once we opened up a little bit around mile 10, I was able to settle into a pace that felt more comfortable to me. I started moving pretty well, and ultimately the first 52 miles went very, very well. I moved smoothly. I was ahead of my splits, and despite a few sections I had some low sections, but ultimately I was bouncing out of those lows and having some very good highs. In the last 5 miles coming into mile 52, I felt great. And I was moving quickly through what we call the aid stations. Aid stations are essentially pre-designated resupply points along the route where they have people there with food, and you can put some of your gear there too. So I was moving through the aid stations quickly. I was getting in and out, and I was moving well. Coming into mile 52, I had a plan that I was going to stop and for the first time all day sit down and change socks. I planned to change socks twice during the race. So came into 52 ahead of my planned splits and sat down and changed socks. Spent a few minutes there eating and reorganizing my gear. But when I left that aid station, I basically said, oh, something feels different. My legs were starting to feel a little cementy, and it was a very distinct difference between when I came into the aid station and when I left. Next slide, please. These are a couple pictures from early in the race. The only 2 I was able to find of myself, these were from a Facebook public page. That's me around mile 25, and then coming out of, as I mentioned, the aid station. This is roughly what an aid station looks like. That's about mile 32. Still feeling really good. Times are good at this point in the race. Next slide, please. Here's a good overhead shot of what one of the bigger aid stations in the race looks like. So there's a lot of kind of spectators and fanfare. Relatively, it's nice to break it up because in between these, you have many miles of lonely, alone time in the woods. So, as I mentioned, leaving 52, I was not feeling very good. And over the next 25 miles, that downward trajectory continued. I was hoping that I'd be able to pull out of it, and because often you are able to in a longer race, pull out of these low spots. But when I came into mile 76 aid station, which was the only indoor aid station of the race, it was the middle of the night, it was about midnight, it was pretty cold, and I went inside and sat down. Luckily, a buddy of mine who I started the race with came into the aid station a few minutes behind me. I saw him and I said, "Hey man, I'm cooked, how are you?" He's like, "I'm feeling rough too." So we made an unspoken agreement that we'd leave the aid station together and try to feed off each other for the last quarter of the race. So we did that. Unfortunately, this did not help us pull us out of our low. We tried to run a few times, eventually ended up settling into a power hiking mode that we ended up keeping for pretty much the rest of the race. I've described it to other people as an overnight death march, which is pretty much how we finished up. The last 24 miles took us about 8 hours, so it gives you a sense of the pace. If there's one silver lining to all this, it's that because we were behind schedule, we crested the last ridge line at mile 95 or 96, just as the sun was coming up over the horizon. So the last 5 miles of the race was a long descent into a town on a lakeside, and we got to do that as the sun rose, which was really nice. If we'd have been on our goal pace, we would have finished the race in the dark. This would have been good because we would have met our goal, but we wouldn't have had the nice sunrise to finish up. So, next slide please. This is me and my friend Greg running to the finish line. As you can see, it's essentially someone's driveway. For such a long, powerful event, it's a very low-key finish line. There's a banner, basically a banner across the finish line, and a guy there to say, "Good job." I went laid in the grass and fell asleep for a little while. Now, I'm going to wrap it up here, talk a little bit about some of the key takeaways, or really just one key takeaway. There's a famous ultra runner, or famous within the ultra running circles, who described 100-mile races once as akin to living life in a day. And now that I've done 2 of them, I can absolutely see what she means by that. I don't think there's very many other pursuits that condense such highs and lows into such a short time frame. 26 hours and 19 minutes, which was my finishing time, is a long time, but at the same time it's very short. It's very short to experience the extremes of highs and lows that we felt during this race. And ultimately, the high of crossing the finish line sticks with you for a long time. And so you have some very bad lows, but you have some very pronounced highs, and those highs stick with you for long after the race ends. And so now it's a week later, and I'm still riding the high from last weekend. And I'll ride it for a little while longer, and hopefully next year I will go back to the bear, because I still feel like I have some unfinished business there. My goal going in was 24 hours. I didn't meet that, but I still think I'm capable of it, and we'll see next year what the bear throws at me. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, most welcome guest, and especially Brad. Brad was giving the storytelling project from the Powerful Presentations path. This is one that I'm not familiar with. We're all getting comfortable, or not, with pathways, as the case may be. So it's something new. It goes along with my dictum of "if it ain't broke, break it." The purpose of this project was to practice telling a story, and Brad, you had some excellent material for this story. 100-mile run, and the kinds of things that you experience when going through that. Some of your strengths include, it was an excellent standard speech structure. You had an introduction, you told us what you were going to tell us, and then you told us, and then you told us what you told us. Your strengths include your voice. You have just a very pleasing voice that projects well, but is not overwhelming. It had good variety. You had good eye contact with the audience, and especially with the story, you want to really maintain that contact. And you were very comfortable with the audience, and that the audience was very comfortable with you. And that's an interesting two-way process that works. The more comfortable you are, the more comfortable we are. It was well constructed and, again, very engaging content. I thought your gestures, for the most part, were very effective. The ones I liked the most were you talking about how the sun was coming up and then descending. I thought that was a very effective pair of gestures. Just something to work on as your resting place was kind of a prayer hand. Again, I think that's come up before. Now, in terms of some suggestions, I want to challenge you to tell it more like a story. Again, the structure was a standard speech structure, but a story is more of a narrative, more of a linear type of thing. And I would have really liked to have seen more of your interior, of what your experience was. And a story structure, you could bring us into that. You could describe the physical sensations, you could describe what's going on. With the story, everything is with the words. A story, there's no need for any visuals. The visuals are distracting from it. Everything is about you taking us through this experience. And so that's my challenge to you, to write a speech in which you take us inside and use that story structure. And you don't have to tell us what you're going to tell us. You bring us in. What Carrie did in her introduction was an excellent way of doing it. She was describing a situation, so you could maybe start at the end or start where you hit the wall there. Imagine I'm sitting there, I have no more energy, but how can I possibly finish this thing? So there were so many opportunities to bring it into a story. And that's my challenge to you, because as a speech, it was excellent. The visuals were good as far as they went, but in a speech, it would be better without them. I also like your humor, that death march and things like that. That brought us in. So again, outstanding speaking skills, outstanding Toastmaster skills, and challenge yourself to take it one step further. Excellent job. Mr. President.